Our next presenter is Anne Levering-Rounds. She works in the English department, is my colleague here at Hostos. Her presentation is What We Have in Commons, WordPress and its Anthologizing Possibilities.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for bearing with me as I just pull up a few things here.
Everybody, please.
All right, so as Jason mentioned in his introduction, I'm going to be talking about this WordPress site that I designed for my department here at Hostos. And I'd like to start off in what might seem an unusual place, and that place is here. And I'll say a little bit more about this clip in a moment.
Just come from a meeting with our publisher.
Everyone can see.
Times have been hard. Papers are folding left and right. The bad news is we're going to cease being a traditional print newspaper. The good news is we've been taken over by Links PDX, a very successful online blog. Our mission remains the same: hard-hitting, local journalism. We're just going to lose the whole print thing. Okay. All right. Folks, I'd like you to meet Trudy Adler, Craig Rodriguez. Say hello to the new boss.
Thanks, George. Thanks a lot. Hi, pleased to meet you. You guys know all the journalistic stuff. We've got a lot of experience with, connections and links.
People don't read articles anymore, and we don't want to provide things that people don't care about.
They probably read every fifth word, so just make up those 5 words.
So your research shows that they can tune out after like 2 sentences? Okay, well, just stay on it.
All right, so in this sketch from the satirical TV show Portlandia, the show's co-stars Carrie Brownstein and Fred Armisen portray the owners of the social media company Links PDX that's recently taken over one of Portland's newspapers, and in these roles they advise erstwhile journalists on how to adapt from the change from print journalism to the online environment. And as you just heard, Carrie's character says, we don't actually have articles, we have links to other articles. And later on in the scene, Fred's character advises the journalist that you saw to, quote, think of yourself less as a journalist and more of a linkalist. So when I set up this website, intended as a resource for faculty and students, I felt a little bit complicit in the linkalist ethos that Portlandia is lampooning in the sketch. Why? Because it includes this area called links to texts. So as you can see, this is all under the header of text frequently assigned in English 110 and English 111. So a user can click through articles, stories, and poems frequently assigned in the curricula of bread and butter courses at Hostos. We don't actually need to engage students or faculty members with the words in the literature we teach, I imagined myself saying in a deadpan pitch for this site. We just need the commons to provide links to the words. So I could spend the presentation discussing how I considered in conversation with colleagues in my department and in EdTech what else to include as the constituent parts of this online resource. So it has a page devoted to each course, each type of course in the department, information about course and general education assessment policies, an events page, both for things here on campus and off. So I could talk about that. I could devote the presentation to a description of the crash course that I'm still giving myself in WordPress, and I was thinking of that as you were mentioning teaching your students the principles of graphic design. Or I could spend the next few minutes discussing how to ensure the effectiveness of a site like this. So how perhaps to use Google Analytics, how to assess the particular site or similar institutional online resources, how could we close the loop after such assessment to make data-driven decisions about how to tweak and maintain the site for the maximum benefits of teachers and students. But in fact, what interests me the most is actually the linkalizing capability of the online learning commons space. So as a repository of links to other texts, the Learning Commons acts as a potentially new kind of anthology in the digital age. An organized heterophony, a considered collection, if not of works in full, of what I think are the meaningful markers of them. So I believe that this links to text page would benefit from exposure to the questions that book historians and cultural critics like Leah Price or Barbara Benedict or Anne Ferry have begun to explore with respect to print anthologies. And these questions might include, on what basis does an anthology decide what to include and what to leave out? Why is it made? Who empowers the canon that it is reflecting? And through what technology is that canon being disseminated and being received? Now, these are complex questions, multifaceted questions, even if we were to just address them for analog rather than digital or born digital anthologies. And the answers would hinge, as we're starting to see in the literature, on choice of national scope, right? So are you picking, oh, I'm going to study the anthology in America, I'm going to study it in England, I'm going to study it in Portugal. It would depend on a critic's choice of particular genre. So Anne Ferry's book is just about poetry anthologies. And it would depend on a decision to focus on a particular medium, such as print text or even audio recording. But for me and for today, I think the question of technology's relationship to anthology creation has special relevance. So before we address the context of what I'm calling, what I'm hypothesizing is a digital anthology, we should acknowledge that relationship question, right? How does technology influence the anthology as important in the context of print media artifacts and the ways that print media artifacts shape encounters with literature. So in the words of the critic that I mentioned, Anne Ferry, she says, the size of any book is always constrained by practical considerations. How heavy it is to hold, how portable, how conveniently sized to display or store, all possibilities inseparable from the consideration of what price it will sell for. Then the physical dimensions and the cost are determined by paper, typeface, format, binding, illustrations, and so forth. So as she talks about 17th and 18th century anthologies, like a poetical rhapsody containing elegies, madrigals, and other poesies, 1602, and the warbling muses or treasure of lyric poetry, containing 731 songs from 1749. I know you all read these in grad school, but just as a refresher. Ferry observes these anthologies heightened awareness of the book as containing space, noting that they have a predilection for calling attention to their own spatial dimensions. Right? So that one title or subtitle, containing 731 songs. So flashing forward in history to books that I have either assigned or been assigned in my own classes, and that you may have been as well, we can see that these spatial dimensions vary quite a lot. From a slender work like this, Poetry After 9/11, an anthology of New York poets, which weighs in at a modest 128 pages, to the door-stopping Norton anthology in this case of African American literature, of some 3,000 pages. So in the case of anthologies, the decision of size rests in kind of a unique way with the aesthetics of the compiler rather than with a single author, and on the brand experience that the compiler wants the book to bespeak. So if we look back in history, we can see that perhaps a slender book like this might have been seen as more elite or more pleasurable than a large one like this. So, but the size, as the Ferry quote gets at, also necessarily rests on pragmatic and material concerns. There is a price tag, and there is a timeline of months or years for printing, binding, and distributing a 3,000-page book. And unless the house is underwritten, endowed, otherwise subsidized, or willing to take a loss, the publisher hopefully has projected that the profit from copies sold will meet or exceed the cost of production. And in addition to the cost to the publisher and the price set for the intended reader, there is also a concrete experience of meeting a poem in this type of context. One tiny lyric on one of 3,000 tissue paper thin pages. So, as a medium for anthologizing literary text, the web dramatically alters this set of concerns because of the speed, easy access, and immediacy it offers potential anthologists when it comes to creating containers for literature or even containers for literary metadata, right? Ta-da, I'm reading the poem. So just this week, I updated this links to text page with links to this semester's common final exam selections in English 110 and English 111, providing links to articles in the New York Times, the Atlantic, and the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and to poets.org. After I emailed the department faculty members to say that the site now had these links up, a course manager let me know within the hour that a link to one of the articles was missing, and I made the fix in minutes. After receiving a very kind thank you email for this page from another colleague, I remembered that he frequently assigns Marvels to his coy mistress in his course, and I updated the list of links again within minutes. So, all right. So again, turning to the growing body of critical literature on this topic of anthologies, at the end of his book, Canons by Consensus, Joseph Cicilla suggests that recent pedagogical innovations like internet-based libraries, customized textbook publishing, and multimedia software technologies are poised to challenge the traditional college-level anthology of American Lit and its privileged, prominent space in the academic literary curriculum in ways that course packs, photocopies, and inexpensive paperbacks never could. And perhaps a site like this is one of the kinds of innovations that Cicilla is talking about, that easily allows individual teachers or representatives of discrete departments, in essence, to be the editors of their own anthologies. What I find exhilarating about this collection is its instant gratification element, and in tandem with that, its ability to be so responsive to the mutable curriculum of the department. The Commons doesn't replace the intellectually challenging and stimulating work of discussing what texts we are going to put in the curriculum. But because of the speed with which it can reflect changes or updates, and because of the ease with which its curator can solicit and represent all voices in the department, and because the web removes traditional concerns about how large the container can be, the Commons or sites like it may be a powerful shift away from the one-size-fits-all authority and the potential physical heft of a print anthology typically assigned as a default textbook. Interestingly, however, the concerns that an online links to text collection raises are also similar to concerns about the anthology in the print era. So, as I was reading around about this, I was reading what Anne Ferry had to say about this lengthy title of a 1704 anthology, which is called The Theater of Ingenuity, or the gentleman's and ladies' pleasing recreation and delightful pastime at leisure hours. And she says that this title, which involves recreation and delightful pastime and leisure, this title, she says, suggests that, quote, anthologies have the advantage in containing discontinuous short pieces suited to the desultory mode of reading that had come to be called dipping. Despite its weight and despite its subconscious or conscious practices of selectivity, the print anthology has also, though, in a way, been a bid for open access, a kind of space saver, a container where a higher quantity of stuff is more readily available to a wider audience, an inclusivity that the name Commons continues to evoke. And along with this inclusivity, historically has come the concern that the anthology promotes these skipping and dipping reading practices. And this is no different in the age of the digital anthology. If this kind of list or bibliography or anthology or whatever it is we're calling it, if it provides a unique and mindfully curated and readily accessible and low or no cost introduction to literature, it cannot ensure that students are clicking on the links. It cannot ensure that students are reading the material once they click on it. And it cannot ensure that they are information literate about these sources, which are also online. So 18th and 19th century concerns about the anthology's promotion of skipping and dipping might seem a little skeptical, kind of a quaint media phobia. And I do believe that creating departmental intertextual dialogue on the Commons and making the constituent texts of our self-curated anthology available for students can transform the way that they encounter literature. But while the digital anthology can redefine what canonicity looks like, it cannot stand in for the work that I know we're all already committed to, that is, of reading, thinking, and teaching. Thank you very much. And please do not ask me about 18th century anthologies. Yeah?
I'm assuming that all of these are, they're links to other websites like open access.
That's
these
correct.
sources.
Yes.
So is there like a pressure to assign things that are open access rather than, something you'd have to photocopy or, it's not available online readily?
You mean,
Is there, do people try to assign things that are openly available? Do you think?
well, I would just say that, in choosing these texts for common final exams, that the trend has been to choose those that are openly available. I mean, and I can imagine if someone chose something that wasn't on a website or was not out of copyright that they could, I can imagine that person coming to me and saying, well, just scan this PDF, and I would have some problems with that.
Yeah, are we really allowed, I'm
No.
not an expert on copyright, so we're not allowed to really do that.
No, we're not.
People do that on like a Blackboard, like a
Right.
course website,
Mhm.
but not an open
Right, so
website.
I take care just in thinking about these links and making sure that, okay, well, I know that poets.org, gets their material with permission of poets.
Mhm.
So I link to that rather than linking to, somebody at another university who just happened to post a PDF of a Plath poem. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I have a question, Anne. One of the rules when I was looking at the massive book on the shelf, one of the things you hear in like new media publication and things like that is like the constant drive to content. You have to be a content creator, constantly. Whereas like with that, it seems like the size and everything becomes different, and I think it speaks to the changing rule. You'd have to edit something. Like if you were doing a paper anthology of poetry, for example. It seems like you'd have to have a different editor hat than when you are gratefully and respectfully, doing the work for the department here. Could you speak to how you feel like there's different rules of editing, or you discovered that editing this is
Yeah.
different?
Well, I'm fascinated by paratexts, which you know, is one of the roles of the editor, I guess. You know, the decision to include a head note. If so, what is it going to say? And I think that you're right, that it does differ very much when you're talking about designing an online source versus when you're doing something for print. But, I mean, even just now in showing this to you guys, you know, I want to think, well, you know, how is this material presented? What am I going to say about it? What are people going to read? Can I make that one short, pithy sentence that explains how to navigate this material rather than just making a laundry list of links that people have to figure out their relevance? So I don't know, and I'm kind of looking forward to the time when I hand the baton to the next person, not because I don't want to do this job anymore, but because I think in doing so, you really get a chance to see how different people edit it and how their suggestions would also become integrated and their voice would become part of the language that's on here that organizes the material for people. So sometimes when I read things, I think, oh, that sounds too much like me. You know, and I don't want this to be like ALR's favorite texts. Yeah. Other questions? I will say too that actually my colleague in the English department is the one who uses this Norton Anthology of AF-Am Lit in her class, and her students are constantly complaining about how heavy it is and having to lug this thing around, and her response is always like, oh, I'm so sorry that you have to carry this around, you know, that African Americans used to be forbidden by law to read. I'm so sorry that you have to lug this around. But I'm sure we've all had the experience of having this or a similar tome.
One of the things I always hated about those big, huge books is that whenever you try and tell your students, you know, mark stuff down. No, of course, and the pages are so thin that they bleed through, and that always used to drive me bonkers.
This is really interesting. I'm using an anthology right now, and I'm using an e-portfolio, and I'm sure I'm doing all kinds of illegal stuff with the content. So this is a nice, this is like very eye-opening for me, how to stay within sort of legal framework and also share information in like a user-friendly way.
And you know, I don't know if I believe that the anthology promotes a sort of less careful reading, but I do think, and this is one of the things that Cecilia says at the end of his book, that, you know, if you're doing this whole choose your own adventure model of working with a customized textbook that gives you initially thousands and thousands of options, it seems more likely that you're going to miss something versus if you assign something where someone's already done that work of picking it out for you and they've presented it in some perhaps more heavy-handed way. But, well, thank you very much.